The morning Westbrook Grand Hotel held its annual staff gala. Nobody noticed the man standing near the service entrance, wearing a pressed white button-down and the kind of tired eyes that didn't belong to someone who had slept well in weeks. His name was Callum Reed, though on the employment form he'd submitted 3 days earlier, he'd written Cal Reynolds, 38 years old, no prior hotel experience, available immediately. Both things were a lie. Callum Reed owned the Westbrook Grand. He'd bought it 14 months ago as part of a portfolio acquisition. 16 properties across Ontario, Alberta, and British Columbia, and hadn't visited a single one in person since the ink dried on the contracts. That was what general managers were for. That was what quarterly reports were for. Except the quarterly report for Westbrook Grand had been flagging for 8 months, and his regional VP, a careful man named Gordon Ashby, kept offering explanations that sounded reasonable and meant nothing. Staff turnover up 18%. Guest satisfaction scores trending lower. Revenue stable but not growing. Stable but not growing. That phrase had followed Callum through 3 business-class flights and 2 board meetings until he couldn't ignore it anymore. So here he was. Early October in Vancouver. The mountains visible on clear days. The air cold enough to remind you winter was serious on the West Coast. He checked in under Cal Reynolds, housekeeping attendant. Temporary hire, casual contract. The HR coordinator who processed his paperwork was a young man named Devin who barely glanced at his face. Callum had been careful about that. Shorter hair than his LinkedIn photo. No watch. Clothes from a department store. The watch alone would have given him away. It was worth more than Devin's monthly salary. His supervisor on the first morning was a woman he heard before he saw. Cartwheels need to be wiped down before your shift starts. There's a protocol binder in the supply room. Second shelf. Blue cover. Read it before you touch anything. She came around the corner carrying a stack of folded fitted sheets, the way someone carries something they've carried 10,000 times, without thinking about it. She was younger than her voice suggested. Late 20s, maybe 30. Dark hair pulled back in a practical knot. She wore the hotel's standard uniform but had somehow made it look like something she'd chosen rather than been assigned. Her name tag read Fiona. She looked at him the way people look at new hires in industries with high turnover. Not unkindly, but without much expectation either. You're Cal? Yeah. Okay, Cal. First 2 hours you shadow me. Don't touch the minibar inventory. People steal from it. And then guests complain and then I have to write a report. Don't move things on guests' nightstands without returning them exactly where they were. And if you break something, tell me immediately. Don't hide it. Got it. People always say got it, she said, already moving, and then they hide things. Callum followed her. He'd expected to find something obviously wrong within the first day or two. A lazy staff culture, pilfering, poor sanitation. Whatever was dragging Westbrook Grand's scores down, he'd assumed it would be visible quickly. The way rot is visible if you know where to look. What he found instead was more complicated. The housekeeping staff worked hard. Genuinely hard. The kind of work that doesn't look like work from the outside. The kind that wrecks your lower back by 40 and rarely gets thanked. Fiona ran her team with the quiet competence of someone who had been doing this long enough to stop being impressed by chaos. What Callum noticed by day 3 was that things kept going wrong above her. A guest in room 412 complained that his maintenance request had gone unanswered for 2 days. Fiona had submitted the request. Callum watched her check the internal system. Request marked pending, no follow-through from the maintenance coordinator. A corporate booking for 12 rooms in November was nearly lost because the reservations team hadn't communicated the group rate correctly. Fiona caught it. She wasn't in reservations. The food for a staff birthday in the break room, arranged a week in advance, didn't arrive because nobody had confirmed with the kitchen. Fiona drove to a bakery on her lunch break and came back with 2 boxes of butter tarts and a look on her face that suggested this was not the first time. On his 4th morning, Callum arrived to find Fiona already in the supply room, standing very still in front of the inventory shelf. Something wrong? She didn't turn around immediately. When she did, her expression was the careful neutral of someone who has learned not to say the first thing that comes to mind. 2 of the premium amenity kits are missing from yesterday's count, which means either the inventory system has an error, or someone pulled from this shelf without logging it. She paused. Or someone took them. Does that happen? It happens when people aren't paying attention. She closed the supply room door behind them with more control than the gesture deserved. It also happens when the people who are supposed to be paying attention don't think anyone above them is watching. Callum said nothing. He was watching. The hotel's director of operations was a man named Garrett Souza. Callum had reviewed Garrett Souza's file before arriving. 12 years in hospitality management. Strong references from his previous property in Calgary. Salary at the top of the range Callum's HR team had approved. In person, Garrett Souza was the kind of man who walked into rooms slightly ahead of the conversation, already explaining something. He had the particular confidence of someone who had been told he was good at his job often enough that he'd stopped questioning whether it was true. Callum watched him from a distance for the first week. What he saw wasn't incompetence. It was something more insidious. A man who managed upward brilliantly and downward carelessly. Garrett knew exactly which metrics to present to corporate, which numbers to frame favorably, which problems to describe as in process rather than unresolved. He also knew, apparently, exactly how to make Fiona's life difficult without leaving fingerprints. It started with small things. A shift reassignment that pulled 2 of her best housekeepers to cover an event floor she wasn't responsible for, leaving her short-staffed on a fully booked Saturday. A maintenance request she'd escalated, twice, that he'd let sit in his queue for 11 days. A performance review meeting that he'd scheduled and then rescheduled 3 times without explanation. Callum watched Fiona absorb all of it without breaking stride. He also, despite himself, started paying attention to her in a way that had nothing to do with his investigation. She was meticulous but not rigid. She improvised when she had to and didn't complain about it. When a housekeeper on her team, a quiet woman named Adeze, started crying in the break room over something Callum didn't hear, Fiona sat with her for 20 minutes without looking at her phone once. She also had, Callum discovered, an unusually specific knowledge of mid-century furniture. It came out because room 318 had a side table that was slightly off. Not damaged, just slightly wrong somehow, and Fiona had stopped in the doorway and said quietly, as if to herself, "That's a reproduction. The original would have had a different drawer pull." "You know furniture?" Callum asked. She looked at him like she'd forgotten he was there. "My father had a restoration workshop. I grew up around it." She moved into the room and straightened the table by millimeters. "He closed it when I was 17. Couldn't compete with the reproduction market." A brief pause. The irony being that reproductions ended up everywhere anyway. She didn't elaborate. Callum didn't ask. But he thought about it for the rest of the afternoon. The conversation that changed things happened on a Wednesday, during a 15-minute break in the staff lounge. Callum had been at Westbrook Grand for 11 days. He'd documented enough about Garrett Souza's management style to make a compelling case for intervention. He probably could have left by day 8. He hadn't. Fiona was eating a sandwich and reading something on her phone, with the focused stillness of someone stealing a moment of peace. He sat across from her with a coffee he'd made badly. The machine in the staff lounge was temperamental, and she glanced at it. "You have to hold the button for 3 seconds before you select the size," she said. "Otherwise, it defaults to the smallest option and overpressurizes." "Thanks." He tried it. It worked. "How long did it take you to figure that out?" "About a week of bad coffee." She went back to her phone. He said, without planning to, "Do you like working here?" She looked up. It was a strange question from a coworker, and she knew it, and he could see her deciding how to answer. "I like the people on my team," she said finally. "I like the building. It's got good bones, this place." The original architect was thoughtful about light. She paused. "There are other things I like less, like Garrett Souza." The silence that followed was very precise. "I didn't say that," she said. "I know." She studied him. He had the uncomfortable sensation of being assessed by someone considerably more perceptive than he'd given her credit for. "Why are you asking?" "Because I've been here less than 2 weeks," Callum said. "And I've already watched him reassign your staff without notice, ignore 2 maintenance escalations you filed, and cancel your review meeting 3 times. And I've watched you handle all of it without saying a word to anyone." The silence this time was different. Longer. "You're very observant for someone who claimed to have no hotel experience," Fiona said. "I learned quickly." "Or," she said, and her voice was quiet and even, "you're not who you said you are." Callum held her gaze. He'd been careful. He'd been genuinely careful. and she'd still seen something. "What makes you say that?" "The way you look at the building," she said. "Not like someone figuring out where things are. Like someone assessing what they own." Callum set down his coffee. The honest answer was right there. He could have said it. He almost did. Instead he said, "I'm just trying to understand how this place works." Fiona looked at him for a moment longer. Then she picked up her sandwich again. "It works the way most places work," she said. "Some people hold it together. Other people make it harder than it needs to be. And the people at the top don't always know the difference." She said it without bitterness. That was what landed. On day 14, Callum watched Garrett Souza call Fiona into his office and close the door. He couldn't hear what was said. He watched through the glass partition. The angle wasn't direct, but enough. He saw Garrett lean back in his chair in the posture of someone comfortable with the power differential in the room. He saw Fiona stand, not sit, which meant she hadn't been offered a seat or had declined one. He saw her face, professional, unrevealing, the same careful neutral she'd worn in the supply room. Afterward, she came back to the housekeeping station and began updating room status on the tablet without comment. "What did he want?" Callum asked. "To tell me my team's turnaround time on the 14th floor was 4 minutes over target last Saturday." She tapped the screen. "On a Saturday when he'd reassigned 2 of my housekeepers to the event floor. Did you point that out?" "I mentioned it. And he said that resource flexibility was part of professional adaptability." She said it in the flat tone of someone quoting something they found absurd. "And that if my team couldn't maintain targets under variable conditions, perhaps the targets needed to be reassessed downward." She paused, "Meaning my performance review would reflect it." Callum said nothing for a moment. "That's not right," he said. "It came out plain. Not corporate, just plain." Fiona looked at him sideways. "No," she said. "It's not." He called Gordon Ashby that night from his hotel room. Not his cover room, the separate room he'd booked under his real name in a different hotel 6 blocks away, where he slept and charged his laptop and was, briefly, himself again each evening. "I need Garrett Souza's personnel file," Callum said. "Full version. Not the summary? Found something? I found a lot of things. I'll put it together properly. But I want the file first." Gordon was quiet for a moment. "How long do you need?" Callum thought about the supply room and the side table in 318 and the staff lounge coffee machine. He thought about the way Fiona had said the people at the top don't always know the difference without looking at him. "A few more days," he said. What Callum documented over the following week was methodical and, in its totality, damning. Garrett Souza had been systematically managing metrics rather than operations. He knew which numbers corporate tracked and which they didn't, and he optimized accordingly. Guest satisfaction scores were suffering because of staffing decisions he was making to reduce labor costs, on paper, which looked good on his monthly reports, and felt catastrophic to the guests actually staying in the rooms and the staff trying to maintain standards with inadequate resources. There was also the matter of a vendor contract for cleaning supplies. Renegotiated 8 months ago, below market rate from a supplier Garrett had used at his previous property, that had resulted in a product quality issue Fiona had flagged twice in writing. Both flags were in the system. Both had been marked resolved by Garrett without action. And there was a guest complaint from 6 weeks ago, a formal written complaint from a family who had stayed in a room where the bathroom fixtures hadn't been properly serviced, and someone had gotten a minor injury. The complaint had been handled, the family compensated, the incident documented, but Callum found, when he looked closely, that the internal follow-up report had understated what had happened. Not enough to constitute fraud, enough to concern him. He sat with all of it for a night. Then he wrote a 3-page memo to his VP of Operations and his legal team, copied his HR director, and attached the documentation. In the morning, he went back to Westbrook Grand and changed into his uniform and went to work. He needed one more day. It wasn't planned. He found Fiona in the stairwell between the 7th and 8th floors. She'd taken the stairs because both surface elevators were in use, sitting on a step with her back against the wall and her eyes closed. She heard him coming and straightened, but not before he'd seen something in her face that she usually didn't let out. "Sorry," he said, and stopped on the landing. "Don't be. I'm just taking 30 seconds. She opened her eyes. Sometimes 30 seconds in a stairwell is the only quiet place in this building. He sat down on the step across from her. It was an odd thing to do. She seemed to find it odd too, but she didn't say anything. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You're going to anyway. The furniture restoration workshop. Your father's. Do you ever think about doing something like that yourself?" She looked at him for a long moment, and something in her expression shifted. Not defensively, but carefully, the way you handle something you don't take out very often. "I think about it," she said. "I've been saving." A pause. "I took this job because it pays well enough to save seriously. The plan was always to use the money to start something." She looked at the painted cinder block wall across from her. "I have a unit I rent in Burnaby. I've been doing small pieces on weekends, chairs mostly, a few tables. I sell them at the Trout Lake Market when the weather's okay. Is that what you want to do? Full time?" "It's what I'm working toward," she said it simply. The way people say things they've said to themselves, so many times the words have become completely clear. Probably another 2 years of saving, if nothing goes sideways. And if something goes sideways? She smiled, briefly. It was the first full smile he'd seen from her. Not the polite professional version, the real one, with the slight tiredness behind it that made it more honest. "Then I figure it out. That's generally what happens." Callum looked at his hands. He had a meeting arranged for the following morning. His HR director was flying in from Toronto. Garrett Souza would be called in at 9 a.m. He should tell her. He knew he should tell her. "Fiona," he said. "Yeah, I haven't been honest with you about who I am." The stairwell was very quiet. Somewhere above them, a door opened and closed. She looked at him. Her expression didn't change immediately, just held, patient and still, waiting for the rest. "My name is Callum Reed. I own this hotel." He said it plainly. No softening. "I've been working here undercover because the property's performance has been declining, and I couldn't figure out why from the reports. I came in as Cal Reynolds to see it from the inside." The silence stretched. "How long?" she asked. 18 days. Another silence. "And the things you said to me," she said slowly. "Asking about Garrett, asking about my work, asking just now about the workshop. All real questions," he said. "I wasn't extracting information. He stopped, started again. "I was genuinely asking." She stood up. He stood too, instinctively. "I need a minute," she said. Her voice was level, but there was something underneath it, something controlled and precise. "Of course." She walked up the stairs without looking back. He heard the 8th floor door open and close. The meeting with Garrett Souza the following morning was straightforward in the way that final meetings tend to be. All the real work had been done before anyone sat down. Garrett came in looking like a man who had been in enough performance reviews to know when one was routine and when it wasn't. He knew within the first 2 minutes that it wasn't. He was allowed to resign in lieu of formal termination. He took the option. He was escorted from the building by 9:45, his personal items in a box, his key card deactivated. The head of housekeeping knocked on Callum's door at 10:15. "Word travels fast in hotels," she said. "It always does." She didn't say anything about the stairwell conversation. She was professional about everything, carefully professional, and he missed, suddenly, the non-professional version of her he'd seen briefly between the 7th and 8th floors. "Your team," he said. "I want to talk to you properly about what's been happening. The reassignments, the maintenance issues, the review that kept getting canceled. I have the documentation, your written flags, the timeline. I want you to know that it's been seen." Fiona nodded once. "And the vendor contract for the cleaning supplies. I want you involved in the selection of a replacement. You've been flagging the quality issue for months. You should be part of fixing it." She looked at him with an expression he couldn't entirely read. "That's a significant offer for a housekeeping supervisor." "You're not just a housekeeping supervisor." He said it matter-of-factly. "You're the person who's been holding the 14th floor, the vendor complaints, the team morale, and apparently the staff lounge coffee machine together for the better part of a year. I'd like to formalize that differently if you're open to it." The careful professional expression held for a moment. Then, very slightly, something in her face relaxed. "I need to think about it," she said. "Fair enough." At the door she paused, didn't turn around. "Cal Reynolds wasn't a bad coworker," she said. "For what it's worth." He said nothing for a moment. "He had a good teacher," he said. She left. She came back 3 days later and said yes to the operations role, an expanded position, newly created, which Callum's HR team had spent 48 hours building a job description for. It wasn't a perfect description. Callum suspected Fiona would improve it herself within a month. What she didn't do, for several more weeks, was treat him like anything other than the employer he was. She was professional and clear and completely, impeccably correct in every interaction. She asked precise questions and gave thorough answers, and did not refer to anything that had been said in stairwells. He understood it. He didn't like it, but he understood it. He was in Vancouver more than he'd planned. He kept finding reasons. The transition period required his oversight. The new operations structure needed senior sign-off at various stages. These reasons were real and also, he acknowledged privately, somewhat convenient. On a Thursday in late November, he was in the hotel's back office reviewing supplier contracts when Fiona appeared in the doorway with her laptop and a notepad. "Do you have 20 minutes? I want to walk through the new check-in protocol before we roll it out to the front desk team." Of course. She sat across the desk from him and opened her laptop and began going through it with the efficient precision he'd come to recognize as characteristic. She'd built a clean, logical framework. She'd anticipated the objections the front desk team would raise. She'd included a trial period and a feedback mechanism. He watched her present it and thought, she would have done this regardless. She was going to do something like this somewhere. I just happened to be the one who saw it first. "This is good," he said when she'd finished. "I know, not arrogant, just accurate. Fiona." She looked up from her notes. "I'd like to apologize again. Properly, not as your employer." He paused. "I lied to you for 18 days. I asked you questions I knew the answers to and questions I genuinely didn't, and I didn't always make it clear which was which, and that wasn't fair. Especially," he stopped, "I came to care about what happened to you before I told you who I was. That's not something I can explain away." "I know that." The office was quiet. Outside, the hotel moved around them, the muted sounds of a building in operation, the industry of it, the hundreds of small things happening simultaneously that required all the people doing them. Fiona closed her laptop. "My father used to say," she said, "that you can tell a lot about a piece of furniture by how it behaves when it's stressed. Bad craftsmanship falls apart. Good craftsmanship holds." A pause. "I've been watching how you behave since the morning Garrett left. How you talk to the team, the questions you ask, what you did with the answers." He said nothing. "You could have replaced the whole management layer and walked away. Most owners would have." She looked at him steadily. "You stayed. You asked people what they actually needed. You built something around what was already working instead of just tearing it down. That seemed like the right thing to do." "It was," she said. "It also told me something about the 18 days before that." Callum held her gaze. "And what did it tell you?" "That you weren't performing curiosity," she said. "You were just curious. There's a difference, and I can tell the difference." He exhaled slowly. "So where does that leave us?" he asked. Fiona picked up her laptop and her notepad and stood. At the door she paused, the same position as weeks ago, but this time she did turn around. "There's a furniture market at Trout Lake on Saturday," she said. "I have 3 chairs there. If you came, I could show you what good restoration looks like." He looked at her. "And then," she said, "we could get coffee and figure out where it leaves us." She walked out. Callum sat for a moment in the quiet office, the sound of the hotel all around him, and found that he was smiling, a real one, with no audience and no performance required. The kind that only happens when something turns out better than you deserved. On Saturday morning, he drove to Trout Lake. He found her immediately. 3 chairs, just as she'd said, each one showing its history, its restoration careful and honest, nothing hidden, everything held. She was talking to a customer when he arrived, explaining the joinery on the back legs of a Windsor chair in a way that made the customer lean in with genuine interest. She saw Callum over the customer's shoulder. She didn't smile yet, but she didn't look away either.